It's fair to say there's always been a darkness inside me. I never considered myself an evil or cruel person, but I was always drawn towards the macabre and twisted. I suppose that's why I started my niche business, acting as a travel agent in the dark tourism industry. I'd been running this unique operation for nearly 2 years before I ran into serious financial difficulties. It actually started off pretty well. My client list was small, but bookings were steady. And in the first year, I organized and led tours to locations as diverse as the Chernobyl exclusion zone, the catacombs under the streets of Paris, La Catedral in Colombia, former prison of Pablo Escobar, and sites of the Ngabin death rituals in Bali. Such destinations are creepy, macabre, and twisted. I suppose that's why I started my niche business, acting as a travel agent in the dark tourism industry. Such destinations are creepy, macabre, and often dangerous. So, it's fair to say my trips don't appeal to the average holidaymaker, and they certainly aren't suitable for families. Nevertheless, I was passionate about my business and wanted to open people's eyes to these dark corners of our world. And for a while, I really thought I could make it work. But little by little, my customer base shrank and then all but disappeared. A few died of natural causes. Others moved on with their lives as priorities changed, and the downturn in the economy made it almost impossible for me to attract new clients. By the time my story begins, the business was in dire straits. I spent day after day sitting in a cold office, the bills and debts piling up, while the phone didn't ring and my inbox remained empty. Frankly, I was in a desperate situation, and I guess that's why they targeted me. I thought I knew darkness and could handle whatever the world threw at me. But the horrors I witnessed since I signed that damn contract, they're beyond my worst nightmares. But all this was still ahead of me as I sat in front of my computer terminal on that slow Monday morning, half asleep until I was brought back to life by the door buzzer ringing. I almost jumped out of my skin as I was so surprised to receive an unannounced visitor to my place of business. I felt a surge of excitement running through me as I reached for my phone and activated the camera app. My heart rate only increased when I cast my eyes upon the mysterious visitor standing outside my door. I saw a young woman in her mid to late 20s, red-haired and stunning, with her voluptuous body shown off by the tight dark business suit she wore. I was instantly attracted to the young woman, and that's even before I saw her face. I guess she knew I was watching her, but she didn't seem to mind. The mysterious woman raised her head and looked up into the camera. It was then that I saw her expressive green eyes and sweet seductive smile set upon ruby red lips. My heart fluttered and I felt weak at the knees, pausing for a moment before I regained enough self-awareness to push the buzzer and open the door to let her inside. I felt my body tremble as I stood up from my chair in anticipation, listening to the ominous clicks as my visitor ascended the staircase in her high heels, and I took a deep breath as the door slowly opened, allowing me to witness the mystery woman in the flesh. She was much more beautiful in person than the digital images I'd seen only moments before. Breathtaking and seemingly flawless. I admired her oval-shaped face, soft rosy skin, passionate green eyes, and ruby red lips. And I felt myself falling under her powerful spell, even though she was yet to utter a word. This woman they'd sent was definitely my type, and I guess that was the intention. She was the seductive siren, while I played the part of the lonely and desperate sailor being lured towards the rocks. I found myself speechless, and so it was left to my visitor to break the awkward silence as she spoke out in a song-like voice. "Good morning, Mr. Walsh," she began, addressing me by my surname. "My name is Lily Burns, and I would like to speak with you about an exciting business opportunity." She held out her slender hand for me to shake, and I did so without hesitation. I welcomed the warmth of her palm, but was surprised by the strength of her grip. This was the first red flag, and the second came shortly after, when I spotted a malicious glint in her eye. And suddenly, I was returned to reality, abruptly ending the handshake and breaking eye contact as I muttered my response. "I'm sorry, Ms. Burns. If you're trying to sell me something, I'm really not in a position to buy." This should have been obvious given the threadbare nature of the empty office, but Lily Burns was not deterred as she laughed gently before replying. "I'm sorry, George. You misunderstand me," she began, casually switching to my first name like we were now old friends. "I'm not here to sell to you. I'm here to offer you a business opportunity, a very lucrative one which will end your financial difficulties and put you back in healthy profit." I frowned as I looked to her smiling face, trying to see past my physical attraction and think rationally about the situation. How did she know I was in debt? I guess it wouldn't be that difficult to find this out. Any sales rep could do their research before making an unsolicited visit. But what was she offering? It sounded too good to be true, and so probably was. Still, I was intrigued and desperate, and so felt I should at least hear her out. I motioned to my desk and invited Lily to take a seat. I also offered her a cup of coffee, which she refused. However, I still felt uneasy as she continued to stare me down across the desk, and I realized I hadn't fully escaped her spell. I also knew I didn't have control over the situation, and I struggled to speak through trembling lips. "So, what can I do for you, Ms. Burns?" I inquired nervously. She smiled once again, nodding towards my desktop computer before speaking. "Check your inbox and your bank account," she instructed. I looked back at her in confusion, only to be met by a determined and confident stare. This was looking more and more like a scam, and yet I couldn't say no to her. I experienced an irresistible urge to switch on my computer and check my messages. There was a new email in my inbox from an unknown sender. The subject line was "New Leads." I opened it with only a second's hesitation and was astonished to find a lengthy list of potential new clients, with names, contact details, personal profiles, and vacation preferences all noted. My jaw dropped in shock as I quickly scanned through the email. But this was only the beginning. Next, I logged into my online business account and could hardly believe my eyes. My overdraft was all cleared. Scanning down the statement, I saw the full amount had been covered by a single bank transfer, again from an unknown payee. And sure, I still had a lot of outstanding debts, overdue rent and credit card bills, but this single transfer had already helped me greatly. But how was any of this possible? I turned back to Lily and saw her self-satisfied grin widen as she nodded her head. "This is only the beginning, George. The leads and payment are for free, a thank you just for meeting with me. But if you sign a contract with my employer, your business will skyrocket. and you'll be rich and successful beyond your wildest dreams." I shook my head in astonishment, feeling like this was some kind of dream. Naturally, I was suspicious and feared a trap. There were many questions I could have asked in that moment, but I chose the most obvious. "What do you want from me?" I asked, whilst frowning. Lily's smile didn't falter as she flicked her eyelashes and laughed softly. "Nothing's for free in this world, George," she proclaimed. "You know that, but what we want is a partnership. We've been watching you for a while now. You're good at what you do, George, but you lack business skills. Still, my employer sees your potential. He admires your passion for the craft and recognizes your unique ability in this niche field. We want you to run a series of high-end tours and excursions for a very exclusive client base. Individuals who are prepared to pay a substantial price for the privilege of visiting these remarkable locations, whether that price is paid in gold or blood." Lily's pitch certainly piqued my interest, but her final words caused me understandable concern. Gold or blood? What did she mean by that? I tried to retain my composure as I answered her. "It's an intriguing offer, Miss Burns, but I'll need more details before I can make a decision." Lily's charismatic smile faded ever so slightly, a hardness entering her green eyes as she shook her head in the negative. "I'm afraid that's not possible, George," she replied firmly. "My employer is not a patient man, and he will require your answer straight away." With that, Lily deftly reached into her leather handbag and pulled out a ream of papers printed on yellow parchment. She placed the contract on the desk in front of me and set down an old-fashioned fountain pen beside it. I glanced down at the paper and could not understand the words written upon it. Apparently, the contract wasn't written in English or any other language I could recognize. This was obviously a big problem, and frankly, I didn't appreciate the hardball tactics. "You can't seriously expect me to sign this without reading it first?" I said, in what I hoped was a convincing tone of voice. But Lily didn't miss a beat as she leaned forward in her chair and met my eye. "Yes, you will," she said firmly. "You're going to sign, George, because you have no other choice. It's either this or your business. Your dream, it all goes up in smoke. And besides, think of all you've got to gain." It was at this point that something very unusual occurred. In an instant, my mind was flooded with a series of vivid images, visions of a possible future which seemed to have been planted into my subconscious. And what I saw was a booming business, my office filled with new customers. My debts were all paid off, and we were making a healthy profit, allowing me to buy a plush new apartment and flashy car. I could see myself wearing a dapper suit, confident and wealthy, a man transformed. And the final vision was of me and Lily together, attending a business award ceremony where I was honored. Lily looked gorgeous, dressed in a sexy black cocktail dress and with her red hair up, and she was coming home with me for a night of passionate lovemaking. I can't explain how these images had invaded my conscious mind or why they had such an impact upon me. But in that moment, I wanted more than anything to sign the contract and obtain all the wealth and happiness which would come with it. I barely had any control over my actions as I reached out for the fountain pen with a shaking hand. Despite the great urge I had to sign, Something in the back of my mind told me this was wrong. Deep down, I knew Lily was tricking me, and I would regret my next actions. But I wasn't strong enough to break away from her dark spell. And so, I lifted the pen and scribbled my signature onto the thick parchment, dropping the pen as soon as I was done. My hand was still shaking and the sweat was pouring down my brow. I felt a strange mix of emotions in that moment. Relief that it was done, excitement over what had been promised, but also an impending sense of dread. I feared I'd just signed my life away, but this was only the half of it. Lily was surely satisfied by my submission, leaning back in her chair as the crocodile-like smile returned to her lips. "Well done, George. My employer is very pleased by your decision." She reached across the desk and picked up the signed contract, carefully placing it back in her handbag. I remained confused and anxious, still not understanding what I'd signed up to. "What happens now?" I asked through trembling lips. "On-the-job training," Lily answered confidently. "We need to get you out on location, George. Let you meet the team and our clients. Teach you the lay of the land." I breathed a sigh of relief, as this didn't sound too bad at all. "Okay, when do I start?" was my next question. Something changed in Lily in that moment, as she transformed in front of my very eyes. Up to this point, I was still deluding myself, still believing on some level that she was an attractive corporate headhunter and nothing more. But then I saw her green eyes turn black and heard the foul cackle which came from her lips as she spoke in a deep and inhuman voice. "No time like the present," she bellowed, before clicking her fingers and summoning an inexplicable dark magic. I felt a surge of hot air against the side of my face as my papers and stationery were blown off the desk. Turning in astonishment, I was shocked to witness the far wall of my office opening up, as what I can only describe as a vortex or portal inexplicably appeared in front of my eyes. My mouth fell open as I stood up from my chair, the hot and rancid-smelling air hitting me as I stared in horrified awe at the swirling vortex of crimson red. I was only distracted from the terrifying vision by a foul cackling, and I turned in time to see the shark-eyed Lily leaping over my desk with the agility of a cat. I tried to run, but she was too quick and strong, grabbing hold of me with claw-like hands which dug deep into my skin. I screamed and fought, but couldn't break free, and Lily used an inhuman strength to fling my limp body across the room and straight into the swirling vortex. I continued screaming as my body was sucked inside and I entered a world of pain and fear, losing consciousness as the darkness took me. I awoke in mid-air and falling rapidly, having no time to observe my surroundings or even cry out before I hit the ground, finding myself half buried in dark sand. The wind was knocked out of me, and it took a moment to recover and pull myself up. Miraculously, I had no broken bones or serious injuries, but when I surveyed my surroundings, I realized I was far from safe. Looking across the shoreline, I discovered I'd fallen upon a beach of black sand, near pristine and stretching for miles in both directions. The sky above me was a foul shade of crimson red, similar in color to the vortex I'd been flung through only moments before. Beyond the beach was a sea of murky green water, with powerful waves breaking along the shore. But most spectacular and frankly terrifying was the spiral-like mountain which dominated the horizon. A vast formation thousands of feet high and adorned with several substantial rocky ledges. At least 9 by my count. I believed I could see figures moving upon the lower ledges, but they were so far away it was difficult to be sure. I slowly walked across the black sands, struggling to breathe as the air was so thick. It was almost unbearably hot, and a foul stench filled my nostrils. As far as I could tell, I was on an island. But this inhospitable isle was unlike any I'd ever visited before. And how had I got here? How was any of this possible? I tried not to succumb to blind panic as I stumbled across the beach, only to be disturbed by a shout from behind me. "Hey newbie, nice of you to drop by." I span around in time to see a trio of figures marching down the beach towards me, all having seemingly materialized out of thin air. As they came closer, I was astonished to see 3 middle-aged men dressed in finely tailored business suits, all smiling and showing off their pearly white teeth as they marched towards me. The trio of businessmen looked entirely out of place in the strange and frightening land, and yet they all seemed perfectly at home here. The man who'd called out to me stepped forward, shooting me a sly wink as he fixed his blonde hair with a comb. "Howdy, pal," he exclaimed amicably whilst holding out his manicured hand for me to shake. "I'm guessing you're George, the new tour guide?" I nodded my head in confirmation, unable to force words through my bone-dry lips. "I'm Bill, and these are my associates, Sanjay and Hans." He nodded towards the 2 men following in his wake, a handsome South Asian man and his bearded European companion. I didn't feel at all comfortable with the situation, but felt obligated to shake Bill's hand in an apparent show of friendship. "It's a hell of a rush. First time you go through the portal, right?" he said. Bill's grin widened, but I remained dumbfounded. "Where the hell are we? And who are you guys?" I asked wearily. "We are business partners with your new employer," Bill answered enthusiastically. "The 3 of us work in finance and investments back topside. That's the day job, but our real passion is games of chance." "Gambling?" I asked incredulously. "Sure," answered one of Bill's companions, who I believe was called Sanjay. "We've played all the casinos in Atlantic City, Vegas, and Macau. But nothing beats the experience here in the borderlands." He glanced up at the towering mountain in the island's center, its summit ascending to the red-tinged storm clouds high above. Sanjay seemed transfixed for that moment, and so it was left up to the 3rd man, Hans, to offer an explanation of sorts. "We call this location the Borderlands," he began, "but many still refer to the island by its original name, Purgatorio." I felt my heart beating faster in my chest, my whole world spinning as I tried to make sense of this madness. "Purgatory," I muttered in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Oh, we're very serious, George," said Bill as he took back control of the conversation. "You are no longer in the mortal realm, my friend. This island is the middle ground between heaven and hell, where the penitents are sent to serve their time and atone for their sins." He pointed up at the distant mountain ledges far above us, where we could just about make out many thousands of tiny figures milling around or sitting on the hard rock, all exposed to the unpleasant conditions of this hellscape. "Those dumb bastards," Bill said whilst shaking his head. "If only they'd had the good sense to make a deal with the man downstairs, like we did. But that's not our problem. We're here for the games, nothing more. Ah, here come our first contestants now." He pointed towards the steep rise leading up to the first ledge of the mighty spiral mountain. I looked up in shocked awe whilst watching dozens, maybe hundreds, of wretched figures approaching the cliff's edge, appearing like lemmings marching towards their doom. I continued to watch in shocked horror as they tumbled over the edge one by one, rolling or falling down the hill before crashing to the beach below. Some reached the sands relatively intact and were able to pull themselves up and continue to march with determination towards the shoreline. But others fell heavily, surely breaking bones and crippling their already weak bodies. But not one of these stricken people cried out in pain, and those who still could limp or crawl along the sands with a stubborn defiance. "Who are they?" I asked in bafflement. "And what are they doing?" "Penitents," Sanjay replied in a matter-of-fact tone as he and the others kept a close eye on their progress. "Sinful souls surfing out their time. Some of these guys have been here for centuries, maybe even thousands of years. That's long enough to drive most people crazy. They'd do anything to escape from the borderlands. As you can see." I shook my head in disbelief, joining the strange trio as we observed the grim procession from afar. "They're heading for the sea," I said, following a sudden moment of revelation. "Of course they are," answered Hans. "This is an island after all. Where else is there to go?" I looked to the unorganized mob of wretched souls, emaciated and filthy men and women with hunger and desperation in their half-crazed eyes. Then I looked to the foreboding sea of murky green and the heavy waves breaking against the sands. All I could see on the horizon was an endless alien ocean, with no other land or means of escape visible in any direction. "They are not going to make it," I said solemnly. "You think?" Bill replied with a cruel laugh. I glared at the yuppie in disgust, but saw no shame in his soulless blue eyes. He refused to meet my judgmental gaze, and it was left to Sanjay to explain. "I'm afraid these penitents are quite insane. They have no chance of escape, but are prepared to break their bodies and throw themselves into the wake just to try. These are truly lost souls." "Sure, they're a bunch of losers," Bill stated dismissively. "But these sorry suckers are also our contestants, and without them, we would have no game." "Game?" I repeated incredulously. But the three men were no longer listening to me, as their focus was now entirely on the desperate penitents as they slowly approached the water. "Okay, enough talk," Bill declared impatiently. "It's time to place your bets. Who's your money on, boys?" A brief pause ensued as both Hans and Sanjay appeared deep in thought. "The dirty blonde-haired woman on the far left," said Hans as he pointed towards an emaciated and half-naked soul who was weaving her way through the sands. "Really?" Bill answered dismissively. "Sure, throw your money away, pal. What about you, Sanjay?" The Indian man delayed for another few seconds before replying. "Put me down for the short guy coming up the middle. The one with the grey beard and crazy hair." "Jesus!" Bill swore, whilst laughing once again. "That old-timer!" "Are you serious?" "Slow and steady wins the race," Sanjay answered quietly. "You guys are out of your damn minds." Bill replied in mockery. "Let me show you how it's done." The arrogant yuppie observed the slowly moving penitents for a few more seconds before making his decision. "The young guy with the red hair coming up on the right walks with a limp, but he's got that winning determination in his eyes." "Okay then," Hans said in a business-like manner. "So we're all in for a cool $250,000? "What?" Bill exclaimed in disbelief. "That's goddamn peanuts. Small stakes for a practice run." Sanjay responded whilst meeting my eye. "We're showing George the ropes, remember?" "Sure, whatever," said Bill. "I'm still gonna kick your asses." "We'll find out soon enough," said Hans as he pointed out to sea. "Here come the catchers." I looked out to the choppy green water and saw something big cutting through the surf, remaining below the surface at first but soon emerging to show its horrific form. I almost stumbled on the sand when I spotted the beast's huge head and hideous fangs, noting its cold reptilian eyes, which were entirely focused upon the shoreline. As the beast came ever closer, I made out its long and thick body, which easily cut through the surf. The hideous creature appeared to be some sort of sea serpent, its hide covered in dark red scales. I estimated the animal was at least 30 foot long, and damn was it fast. And as the lead serpent rapidly approached the beach, others soon emerged from beneath the waves. I counted at least half a dozen, all moving rapidly and with a deadly determination. It was obvious where the pack of foul serpents were heading. Clearly, the monsters were after the wretched penitents who even now were continuing their suicidal march to the water, walking straight towards their imminent doom like lambs to the slaughter. "What the hell?" I spluttered in disbelief as I watched the horror unfold. I hadn't asked for an explanation, but Hans offered me one nonetheless, walking up beside me and whispering in my ear, "Don't worry, my friend. We are quite safe." I turned to him in disbelief, my jaw dropping as I struggled to find the words. "What is happening? Those monsters, what are they?" Hans smiled grimly as he looked out to sea, while Bill cried out in excitement as the game played out. "You've heard of the serpent in the Garden of Eden?" Hans inquired, although he didn't wait for an answer. "These are their descendants, larger, stronger, and more aggressive. They work for the man downstairs. He's always on the hunt for fresh victims, and the penitents who come too close to the waterline are easy prey. Whoever they catch will be devoured whole, and their souls will be condemned to the inferno for all eternity." I felt an ice-cold chill running through my body as I looked to the damned souls and then to the killer serpents who were now only meters from the beach, their twisted yellow eyes full of ravenous hunger as they closed in their prey. Amazingly, the wretched penitents seemed totally oblivious to the imminent danger as they continued to walk towards their doom. I didn't understand why this was happening, but I soon guessed the rules of the game. The sick bet which Bill, Sanjay and Hans had embarked upon. They were betting on which poor bastard got eaten first, on whom would be devoured by the lead serpent. A horrific massacre was about to occur in front of my very eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And so, I stood frozen beside my sadistic companions, watching impotently as the horror unfolded. I don't know how, but the sadistic trio had picked the best contestants from the pack. The blonde-haired woman, bearded man, and red-headed youngsters soon broke away from the rest, speeding up as they came close to the water. Meanwhile, the serpents hissed in hungry anticipation, their heads rising out of the water as they closed in for the kill. It was a close race, but the red-headed man was the first to go. I could only watch as the monster leapt out of the water, its hideous maw expand into impossible dimensions as it set upon its victim and started to eat him whole. swallowing his limp body like an anaconda would devour a rodent. It was the craziest thing, but the victim didn't fight or try to escape his awful fate. He didn't even scream. In a matter of seconds, the giant serpent had consumed the entire body, its victim's flesh now dissolving in the belly of the beast, while his soul was surely banished down to somewhere truly evil. I felt like I was living through a nightmare as events unfolded rapidly. I was vaguely aware of Bill crying out in joyous celebration. "Hell yeah! Winner, winner, chicken dinner!" he exclaimed whilst jumping up and down on the sand. Meanwhile, the massacre continued as yet more deadly serpents leapt from the murky waters and set upon their victims, devouring them one by one in a sickening spectacle. I looked away in disgust, feeling the bile rising up my throat as I vomited on the beach. I heard Bill laughing as he walked over and patted me heavily on the back. "Man up, Georgie boy. You'll need a stronger stomach for this line of work." I looked up in annoyance, but Bill had already moved on to mock his companions. "Well guys, looks like I kicked your asses once again. What can I say? I know how to pick them." Sanjay and Hans met their friends gloating with hard stares. "Yes, congratulations, old friend," Hans said sarcastically. "A great triumph indeed." "Quite," Sanjay added, whilst shooting him a killer glare. "You were always a clever guy, Bill. Too clever, perhaps." Bill's expression changed as suddenly he became concerned. "What do you mean?" he asked defensively. Sanjay laughed in open mockery before replying. "Come on, man. You think we don't know about your secret accounts in the Caymans? Do you think the man downstairs doesn't see you stealing from him? Our master demands retribution for your treachery, Bill." I could see the terror in Bill's eyes as he realized he'd been caught out. "Come on, guys, let's talk about this," he spluttered whilst holding up his hands defensively. Sanjay and Hans began advancing on him with menacing intent, while Bill started backing up along the beach. But he failed to see the real threat, which was coming from behind. I spotted the one serpent which had broken from the pack and was slithering along the sands rapidly, heading straight for the unsuspecting Bill. I saw the attack coming and could have shouted a warning, and yet I chose not to. As it happened, Bill noticed the attack too late, turning and screaming in sheer terror as the serpent hissed and opened its giant maw. His death was horrific but mercilessly quick, as the hellish snake devoured its victim in one mighty gulp, digesting his entire body before lazily slithering back up the beach. I turned around to face Sanjay and Hans, noticing with some concern that they were now staring directly at me. I feared for my own safety, but felt helpless as there was nowhere for me to run. But the men surprised me by smiling in something close to an amicable fashion. "Tough first day, George," said Sanjay. "You did good, kid." Hans added, "But now it's time for you to go home." I felt a rush of hot wind against my back, turning to see a new vortex of swirling crimson red which had inexplicably appeared on the beach only yards away. I didn't like the prospect of traveling through the hideous portal, but I sure as hell didn't want to stay here. And so I didn't look back as I sprinted across the sand and flung myself into the whirlpool, letting the darkness take me. I awoke in a familiar place, my head aching and vision blurred. I was back in my office, sitting on my own chair, but I was far from safe. Lily was there, of course, sitting across the desk and transformed back into her human form. But I no longer saw her beauty, only the ugliness and evil which lurked within her. Nevertheless, she smiled and winked at me before speaking in a soft voice. "Well done, George. The first one's always the hardest. It will get easier, believe me." I shook my head in disgust, my heart filled with an angry defiance. "No," I said firmly, whilst meeting her steely gaze. "I won't do it again. I will not be a part of this evil." I expected Lily to go mental as the angry demon inside her took control, but she remained surprisingly calm on the surface, her false smile not fading as she answered, "I'm afraid that's not possible, George. You've signed a binding contract and the penalty clauses are quite severe. Here, let me show you." Once again, I lost control of my own mind as my soul was thrust into a place of Lily's choosing. But the place she sent me wasn't a good one. Instead, I was transported to a realm of pain and suffering. I found myself half naked and surrounded by ice, my whole body trembling due to the extremities. Everything hurt, including opening my eyes. But I did so nonetheless, and all I saw in every direction was an endless plain of empty ice, snow, and freezing cold winds. A lifeless hellscape without end. I could literally feel my skin and joints freezing as I forced myself up and struggled forward on bare feet, searching in vain for some respite or shelter. What I found instead was something horrific. As the snowstorm cleared, I witnessed 4 figures protruding from the ice. Still living human bodies trapped in this bitterly cold hellscape. I had a terrible feeling as I slowly advanced towards the captured souls, my ears filled with their pained screams. And my worst fears came to fruition as I saw their terrified faces, and there was an instant recognition. Before me, their bodies encased in ice, were my older sister, my young niece, and my elderly parents. All were trapped up to their waists, desperately trying to dig themselves out with no success. Their skins were blue, and their eyes wide with absolute terror. My family was suffering, and they begged for my help. But before I could do anything, Lily snapped her fingers and brought me back to reality. I shot up from my office chair, my brow covered in cold sweat as I demanded answers. "What the hell was that?" I cried. "That was a vision of the future," Lily replied smugly, with the twisted smile still on her lips. "Your nightmare will become the reality if you fail to fulfill the terms of your contract." My anger turned to icy terror as I realized what I'd done. Not only had I put my own soul at risk, but I'd also placed my loved ones in extreme danger. Lily and whatever evil entity she worked for, they had me over a barrel. If only I had shown strength and resisted Lily's charms and false promises. But alas, I signed that damn contract, and now I have no choice. I felt all my defiance melting away as I meekly submitted to Lily's demands, collapsing back into my chair as I uttered my words of submission. "Okay, what do you want me to do?" Lily's hateful smirk widened and her green eyes twinkled with malicious glee. She stood up and made for the door, offering me a few parting words as she went. "We'll be in touch soon with your next assignment. Good day, George." And with that, she left me alone in my office, her heels clicking on the stairs as she descended. So this is how my nightmare began. I was seduced, tricked, and coerced into this cruel world of sadistic mortals and twisted demons. Yes, they screwed me over, but I've only got myself to blame, as I should have resisted temptation and smelt a rat. But what's done is done. I'll need to play their game and visit these hellscapes to keep my family safe, but I haven't given up all hope. There must be some way out of this cursed contract and some means of escaping Lily's ice-cold grasp. And so, I'll play along for the time being whilst pretending to be their loyal servant. But with whatever resources I can muster, I'll try my damn best to destroy this evil system from within.